The Elder Scrolls II Daggerfall was released by Bethesda Softworks back in 1996. This was the last Elder Scrolls game for which Todd Howard was not the project leader, and thus marks the last good Elder Scrolls game. Except it isn't very good, and I'm going to be talking about some of the reasons as to why. Yet if you look through this channel, you'll find that Daggerfall is just about all that's on here. Why is that? Well, the answer is pretty simple. I really like this game. I'm going to talk more about that later, but first, let's talk about why this game is trash. Actually, real quick, second intro time, I just wanted to say this for all the folks that will be putting the video in the background. I am one of you. The video is a heavily condensed and sped up full playthrough of Daggerfall. There will be a few visual aids on screen though, but I'll tell you when you need to tab back in to see them. Okay, now let's talk about why this game is trash. The single largest flaw with Daggerfall, in my opinion, is the lack of meaningful content. All of the towns and cities are made from a handful of building blocks, the same is true of dungeons. As you go through the game, you'll begin to recognize the dungeon modules especially, as each one usually has 4 variants associated with it, which brings the effective total down by about a quarter. Likewise with cities and towns, you'll often run into the same groupings of buildings, just with a different architectural style, which just means a different wall texture. There are many quests in this game, but they all boil down to only a handful of objectives. There are the main quests, some of them are mandatory, some of them are optional. Technically, all of the main quests are optional, because you don't have to do the main quest, but you know what I mean. The main quests largely involve going and talking to people, or running through the main quest dungeons for various objectives. The side quests are plentiful, but they also boil down to the same sort of thing, except they point you to a random location, rather than a specific one. While all of the different quests have different text blurbs that the quest giver says to you, there are only really a handful of different types of quest, and most of the different types can be reduced to only a couple of different categories. This is starting to get confusing, so let me give you some examples before neither of us know what I'm talking about. For example, one quest I do a lot is the Fighters Guild quest, Hunt for a Lycanthrope. The aim of this quest is to go to a random dungeon the quest giver tells you about, and to find a specific lycanthrope that spawns in at a quest location within the dungeon. When you kill the lycanthrope, or sometimes it's a bear, but that's neither here nor there, you'll get a little pop-up saying that the lycanthrope threat is ended. You're free to go back to the Fighters Guild and report your success. Another quest I do a lot is the Mages Guild quest, Retrieve an Ingredient. The aim of this quest is to go to a random dungeon the quest giver tells you about, and to find a specific ingredient that spawns in at a quest location within the dungeon. When you collect the ingredient, you'll get a little pop-up saying that this must be the ingredient the quest giver wanted. You're free to go back to the Mages Guild and report your success. Both the previous examples, while the goal is technically different, fall into the same category of dungeon quest. There are a couple of other dungeon quests. Sometimes you need to talk to someone in a dungeon, sometimes you need to kill a specific enemy and grab a specific item off of their body, but they ultimately boil down to the same category, dungeon quest. Other categories of quest include talking to a person, or collecting an item in town, or going to a location and killing enemies that are spawned at you via event triggers. Now yes, I know technically any quest can be boiled down to go to place, do a thing, turn in quest. I'm not saying that other games are immune to that. What I'm saying is that the way to make quests interesting is to spice up what you're doing, the way you need to approach doing it, or giving some sort of unique obstacle preventing you from doing it. The only quest in Daggerfall that I can think of that does anything special with this formula is the acceptance test for the Dark Brotherhood. In order to do this quest, you need to go to a house and find a decanter of wine. You pick it up and automatically add some poison to it. Then, you have to drop the decanter somewhere in the house and leave. While that isn't all that much, it is at least one extra step, dropping the quest item, that makes the doing thing a bit more involved. Quests need just that little bit of pizzazz to make them more interesting, and if half the quests in Daggerfall had even that small of a flair to them, I would be a lot more willing to forgive the game on this point. Maybe throw in a puzzle or something. Puzzles, huh? Daggerfall has some puzzles. Yeah, so puzzles in this game. They're not good. There are only a couple of puzzles in this game that actually give you hints on how to complete them. The rest, trial and error, plug and chug. Pull a lever, go see if you can progress, repeat until you can progress, repeat all that until the puzzle's solved. If it isn't that, it's a matter of clicking a torch or skull or other innocuous object that doesn't seem like a lever or button. There are only kind of puzzles in random dungeons, that is to say dungeons that aren't part of the main quest. They're usually only 2 or 3 step puzzles at most, and more often than not just seeing if X lever opens a Y door. Whether that really counts as a puzzle is sort of neither here nor there, because that's most of what you get with this game. But then there are the puzzles in the main quest dungeons, and those are a whole different beast. The Sentinel puzzle to Prince Corollas, trial and error, just see which levers do what. The door puzzle in the first room of the Mantella, just trial and error, open one of the doors. Which one? The one on the south side, I think. Or maybe it's the one on the north. I don't know for sure, but what I do know is the Frostator is going to open one of the other ones, and then you're fucked. The puzzle in the room immediately after the first room in the Mantella, gotta click some of the headstones. Which ones? I don't know. To this day, I just click them each once. The fire room in the Mantella does, however, give you some hints as to how one must solve the puzzle, and this is good, but to risk exaggeration, that's basically the only one. Yeah, the puzzles just aren't all that great in this game, which is a shame, because I really do love puzzles in role-playing games. I don't like this kind of plug-and-chug puzzle, though. Maybe some people do, but I just find it tedious more than engaging, and I'll be honest, this small section of the video is mostly just me complaining about these puzzles. I don't think this is a huge mark against the game, just a small demerit. I want to take a brief moment here to talk about some other criticisms I've seen about the game that I am not going to be making. This isn't to say that these aren't problems with the game necessarily, or that your opinion is wrong if you are bothered by these things. This is just to say that I personally don't find myself enjoying the game much less for these. Also, I'm sure this isn't an exhaustive list, and I'm sure there are plenty of legitimate criticisms that I will neither address here nor make myself elsewhere in the video. The first one is the graphics. The graphics are not all that great, but I don't really care. The game's old, and I don't think you can reasonably call this a flaw of the game. The graphics are definitely serviceable. The worst thing about the graphics is the low draw distance and impenetrable wall of fog that exists 3 meters away from your character, but that is alleviated partially by the Eye of Argonia patch and entirely by the Unity recreation. Secondly, I want to talk about the bugs. There are a lot of them in this game. However, I think that most of the bugs can be worked around with a bit of experience with the game and a bit of save scumming. Most of the time, these bugs are not going to be negatively impacting your playthrough to a large degree, especially when you learn the debug commands like Alt F11 to help you with them. This is also a problem that is entirely alleviated by the Unity recreation. Thirdly, I've seen displeasure expressed with the main quests being A, level gated, and B, timed. While technically I suppose these are arbitrary restrictions on player agency and choice, I just think that these restrictions are so minor as to be incredibly easy to work around. The level requirements are pretty easy to meet, and the time limits are very generous on main quests. Like I said, I'm sure there are plenty more, but I'm only willing to make this video so long. So let's get back to my problems with the game. Combat in Daggerfall is very simple. In fact, it is too simple in my opinion. It is a series of dice rolls to determine your chance to hit an opponent and to be hit by an opponent, and to determine damage upon successful hits. Melee combat has a single mechanic that the player can take advantage of. That single mechanic is attack type. Depending on how you swing your mouse around while making an attack, you can either do a thrusting, chopping, or horizontal or diagonal slashing attack. These 4 different attacks give you minor bonuses or penalties to hit and damage. The least accurate and most damaging attack is the downward chop, and the most accurate but least damaging attack is the thrust. This is an important part of the early game, as being able to reliably thrust, thus increasing your chance to hit, can make early combats much less dangerous to the player. The crazy thing about this to me is that many people play without this mechanic. With the Unity recreation, an option was added to the launcher to enable click to attack. This allows you to simply click the attack button, the right mouse button by default, and make an attack selected randomly from the 4 attack types, rather than moving your mouse cursor while holding the button down. Obviously, this isn't a fault with the game, nor is there a problem with people who use this option. It is simply that I find this a particularly peculiar choice. Beyond the mechanics of melee weapons, you have the weapons themselves. There are 4 melee weapon skills plus hand-to-hand and archery. Each melee weapon skill has 2 or more different weapons that fall under that skill. Yeah, 2 or more. The axe skill covers 2 weapons. There are only 2 different axes in this game. And all of these weapons are fundamentally the same thing. The different weapon classes have no differences between them. The only difference between weapons are the weight and damage ranges. The Warhammer, it's just a worse daikatana. It's heavier and does less damage. The Claymore, it's just a worse daikatana. It's heavier and does less damage. The War Axe, just a worse daikatana. It's heavier and does less damage. This is why weeaboos should love Daggerfall, because it's the only way a katana can actually be better than a Western sword. It would be nice if there were other mechanics associated with the different weapons. Blunt weapons could have a higher chance to stagger your opponent. Axes could decrease the target's armor class. Long blades could increase your armor class against melee attacks. And short blades could have a chance to bleed for extra damage. But they don't. The only differences between the weapons are stats. Hand-to-hand doesn't have this problem, but that's only because there are no different weapons for hand-to-hand. There are no brass knuckles for you to equip, nor anything else of that sort. While this could be an example of missed potential, I don't think this is too serious of a crime. A lot of the fantasy of using the unarmed skill is to be your own weapon, and to rely on nothing but your own skill. Like the axe skill, the archery skill also only covers 2 weapons, short bows and long bows. Like the melee weapons, there are no differences between these 2 weapons, beyond weight and damage range. There is no difference in reload speed, stagger chance, quiver size, nor anything else between the 2 bows. In fact, quiver size isn't even a thing, you just have immediate access to all of the arrows in your inventory. Okay, so maybe all this weaponry stuff is not the ideal. Good thing this is a fantasy game, right? All sorts of cool magic is to be had in the world of Tamriel. Magic in Daggerfall is interesting. There are 6 schools of magic in Daggerfall, and there are 2 types of spell beside that. There are the pre-made spells that you can purchase from NPCs, also called cercinate spells, and then there are the spells that you can purchase through the spell-making system. And these cercinate spells, they're bad. I don't want to go into too long a deep dive about the mechanics of magic in this game, but I need to talk about a few of them to explain the problem with the cercinate spells. Spells can have up to 3 spell effects. Each spell effect can have duration, chance, and or magnitude, and these properties are split into 2 parts. Let's take duration, for instance. The first part is the base duration, X rounds. The second part is the scaling based on your character's level, Y rounds per Z levels. Usually Z will be 1, but it can be higher. Your spell's total duration will thus be X rounds plus Y rounds per Z levels. The same goes for both chance and magnitude, though for magnitude each of the base and scaling values are ranges. The main problem with the cercinate spells is that they usually have very large base effects and low scaling effects. For example, the spell Ice Storm does 1 to 30 damage plus 1 to 5 per level. This means that it's not a spell that gets much better as your character increases in level. Almost all cercinate spells are like this. I can't go through all of the spells, there are 77 by my counting, but I promise that this is not a problem unique to Ice Storm, nor even to destruction spells. Of course, they're not all like this, but many are. Well, one might say, if these spells are highly powered at base and don't get much better as you level, these are perfect for low-level characters. And one might be right, but they aren't. On screen we'll be shown a quick look at every cercinate spell separated by school. This character is a mage with 80 intelligence and with a 40% in each magic skill. A low-level character can reasonably have 80 intelligence and have a 40% in their preferred school of magic. This character is actually level 5, but that's because I had to increase all 6 schools up that high. If I had only chosen one school, this character could be as low as level 1. As you'll see, there are a lot of spells that this character can simply not cast at this low level. I simply don't have enough spell points. In fact, of the 77 cercinate spells, this character can only cast 47 of them. If this character were a sorcerer and thus had 240 maximum spell points instead of 160, that number would go up to 65 of the 77. This might not seem like much of a problem, but remember that these spells don't get much better as your character gets better. What that means is that by the time you achieve the skill required to cast these spells, The spell likely won't be worth casting, especially over a custom spell. In addition to simply being unable to cast many of the Cercinate spells, many of the spells that this low level character can cast are still too expensive. Many of them can only be cast once or twice before you're out of spell points. You don't passively recover spell points in Daggerfall, you have to spend time resting in order to regain your magic juice. It takes 8 hours of rest to recover all of your spell points. Quests, too, are timed in this game. You may only have a few in-game days to complete the quest after you consider travel time to and from the dungeon. Do you really want to set aside so much time to rest? Conversely, do you really want to get only 2 or 3 casts of a spell before you're not going to be using magic for the rest of the dungeon? Another problem with the Cercinate spells can be illustrated well with our friend Ice Storm. Again, Ice Storm does 1 to 30 damage plus 1 to 5 per level. The problem here is the sheer range of damage outcomes. A level 10 character could roll anywhere between 11 and 80 damage. This is a huge range of possible outcomes. Some people might prefer this sort of huge variation, but I absolutely do not. And this time I can say that all Cercinate destruction spells are like this. The saddest problem with this game is probably all of the cool things that exist within it that have basically no purpose. The Iliac Bay is massive, but there's little to meaningfully explore. There are dozens of factions throughout the Iliac Bay, maybe even hundreds, but only a handful of them matter to your character in any way. There are so many rumors that you can hear while talking to commoners, but they never impact the game in any way. There are really cool faction perks like access to the Mages Guild library or Thieves Guild Spymaster, but the Spymaster is just a source of more rumors, and the library at the Mages Guild is identical to the public libraries, which to be fair are a bit less common than the Mages Guild halls, but are a free alternative. You can purchase houses, but the only thing they provide is storage space, which I personally have not needed a single time in several hundred hours. You can buy a boat, which also provides storage space and makes traveling by ship free, but by the time you can afford a boat, you're definitely not hurting for cash. And speaking of cash, we need to talk about the economics of this game a little bit. The economy is just busted in this game. The things that cost a lot of money cost a lot of money. Housing and ships cost hundreds of thousands of gold, which would take a lot of dungeon grinding to get to and would be quite an achievement. There's one major problem, though, and that's that dungeon grinding isn't the only way to get some money into your pockets. Daggerfall is, in my mind, rather notable for being an RPG with a banking system. There really aren't all that many of those, it seems, for some reason. It's like banking is a modern thing and can't fit into fantasy settings, despite the oldest extant bank having been founded in 1472, and the ideas of banking, credit, and money lending tracing back to the ancient world. But yeah, there are banks in Daggerfall, and with banks come loans. Let me ask you a question. You are a first level adventurer. You have about 750 gold to your name in equipment, spells, and loose change. How much gold do you think a reasonable banker would lend you? Maybe 500 gold? You could buy a good weapon with that, or a couple spells maybe. If you sold some stuff, you could even buy a horse and cart, which would let you carry more loot back to town to sell. That would be a good little package to start your career, wouldn't it? Or maybe it's a little bit more than that, 1,000 gold. You wouldn't need to sell anything really to get that horse and cart. You could buy several spells with that, or a few armor pieces to protect yourself. That would be great. 50,000 gold pieces. That's how much the good folks at the Bank of Daggerfall will lend to a first level character. You could buy a store's entire inventory and a copy of every Cercinate spell and still have money to spare with that big of a loan at level 1. And that's just the Bank of Daggerfall. There's also the banks of Wayrest, Sentinel, Yakalan, Anteclair, Phrygius, Glenumbra Moors, and the other 34 regions which all have their own banks, and boy howdy are they all willing to give you the same 50,000 gold loan. Oh, and that's 50,000 gold per character level, so if you're level 2, it's 100,000 gold each. Because of loans, all of the expensive things in the game, housing, ships, enchanted items, Daedra summoning, etc., are all easily achievable at very low levels. All of these things feel like they should be endgame goals, long quests that should have many stages to complete before you attain your goal. And yet they are no less outside your grasp, fresh out of Privateer's hold, as they are after becoming a level 20 Archmage. Now, taking loans is all well and good, but you'll have to pay those back or face consequences. The kingdoms of the Iliac Bay won't just allow a random level 1 player character to commit financial fraud, the likes of which won't be seen again until the '08 recession, right? Well, no. There are no downsides to not repaying your loans beyond an inconsequential hit to your regional reputation and the inability to take another loan from a given bank while you still have the first one taken out. I always find this sort of thing difficult in video games. Much like exploits and glitches, this sort of game mechanic is hard to ignore once you become aware of it. If it is my goal to purchase a boat, why not take out a loan for it? I find that you either become relatively self-disciplined or end up not having much fun with a lot of video games, especially RPGs, and Daggerfall is certainly no exception. But anyway, that's enough of the negative talk. Like I said earlier, I really do like this game, and now let's talk about why. The biggest reason for me loving Daggerfall is actually one of the very things I criticized it for. The game is very repetitive, but I actually kind of like that. With repetition comes understanding and practice, and with understanding and practice comes improvement. At some point, once you've improved enough, comes mastery. I really don't want to brag, but in some ways I am a master of this game, and that means that I can play this game without stressing too much about it. Personally, I find the repetitive and now relatively low stress nature of Daggerfall meditative, almost therapeutic. I can, and have many times, quiet the game audio, put on a podcast or some music, and simply coast through Daggerfall dungeons as a way to relax. That's what I did for the playthrough in the background, after all. I find the game an almost perfect level of complexity and balance between action and monotony to do this. There's something so sweet to me about the ability for me to go into a dungeon, walk around a little bit, and recognize which dungeon module I'm in and where I should go to get to where I want to be. I can walk into a dungeon I've never been in before and be able to navigate it with relative ease due to the repetition of the modules. I'm sure many other people would be profoundly disappointed by this, and they'd be well within their rights to be so. But this is a video partly about why I love this game after all. I like being able to go to a quest giver and knowing exactly what kind of quest they can give me. It lets me make sure that I get the kind of quest I want to do. I play this game for the dungeons after all, and I don't want to accidentally get a talk to a person for me quest when I want to go deep into the bowels of the earth looking for some fairy dragon scales or the product of a horrible science experiment gone wrong. The repetitive nature of the game ensures that I'm able to do what I want to do when I want to do it. Running through the tunnels and dungeons and being accosted by the inhabitants is an enjoyable experience for me. The low intensity and rhythm of it is similar to a mellow high. The world melts away just a little bit, and I just vibe with the game, at least until the bad music track comes on, but I can just mute that and listen to something else. So, I'm genuinely not convinced that I experience nostalgia, or at least not in the same way that other people do. Maybe it's because I didn't have a happy childhood, or maybe it's because I have impeccable taste. But I always find that when I go back to something I liked when I was a kid, I still like it now, and for good reasons other than nostalgia. Nostalgia is always a weird thing to talk about, especially when it comes to video games. I feel like people are so willing to say that the only reason people are interested in X game is just because of nostalgia. If that game came out now, then no one would like it. Maybe they are right, maybe not, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't like a game you feel nostalgia for. You liked that game back in the day, and you didn't like it because of nostalgia back then, so there's probably still something to it other than nostalgia now, after all. Mad Season Show did an entire video about nostalgia in relation to vanilla World of Warcraft. I'd recommend it. They're a little long-winded about it, but something about people with glasses shouldn't live in stone houses, I guess. I don't know. It is technically a reaction video to another video by Jimmy, spelled with a 1, about nostalgia in reference to old school RuneScape, but they do add a lot more content than most people who do reaction type content. I'll leave a link to both videos in the description. But anyway, about this game and nostalgia for me. I didn't play this game as a child, nor did I play this game early in its lifetime. My first Elder Scrolls game was Skyrim, after all. That's a bad game that I don't like, by the way. But I can say that this game, and me finding my own enjoyment in it, has been something that has helped me through some hard times in my life, and I acknowledge that. I guess that's close enough to nostalgia. Daggerfall is truly a masterclass in missed potential and fruitless ambition. The vampire factions, which were underdeveloped, skills cut from the game, and so many other things which never made it into the game as the developers originally wanted. The game is massive, yet the space of possibility is actually pretty small. All of this is all bad. And yet, I find that missed potential is an interesting thing. Obviously, you want a video game to live up to its potential. And yet, I find that my mind will become abuzz with what could have been. It seems to me that the various ideas in my mind that run about are often just about as enjoyable as the game meeting that potential. I know this might just be me huffing copium, but I swear it isn't. I wish I could think of a better example, but I really can't. But you also get this sort of point made when it comes to clothing that shows a lot of skin. A lot of people would say that skimpy clothing is more attractive than outright nudity because it leaves something for the mind to work with. So, yeah, I guess Daggerfall's hot now. I can only hope it's taller than me. When I go through the game, I find myself imagining many alternate realities where the game is different, more fleshed out, more complete, or sometimes totally different with radically different systems. What if Daggerfall had a Romance of the Three Kingdoms style war going on, where the 41 provinces could fight over bits of territory, and you could help a chosen province do so? What if Daggerfall had more spell effects to mess around with? Think of all the crazy combinations you could make with even more ingredients to mix together. What if I could find a boyfriend? In Daggerfall, I mean. I end up enjoying these alternate realities just as much as I do the game itself, though in a different way, and this just ends up adding to the experience for me. It's a fantasy game, after all. Why do I have to be limited to the fantasy that the game presents by itself? I was looking through a box of old things recently, and I found a childhood toy that you can see on screen. I didn't have a good way to capture this footage, so I profusely apologize for its poor quality. I had to hold a webcam in my mouth. When you look at the toy critically, it's basically just a hunk of plastic. It's just a little disc that can expand and contract. This is an incredibly simplistic mechanism, and it doesn't take very long for even a young kid to figure out how it works. And yet there's something very fascinating about this simplicity. Yes, it's a very simple mechanism that only has a single mode of operation, or I guess two, if expanding and contracting are two different modes. But there's just something about it. Despite being fully grown, as far as I'm aware, my little rat brain just lights up messing with this thing. I like being able to figure out, at least broadly, how a game works. The problem is that I have a smooth brain. A game needs to be pretty simple in order for me to figure it out. Daggerfall is just the thing for me. Rats are pretty easy to please, and I'm no exception. It's a bit lazy, but I really don't have any more to say on this point. I feel like most people are probably either just gonna get it or they won't. So, why am I talking about how bad this game is, and why am I talking about how much I like it? Well, I don't know. I guess all of this is to say this. Sometimes it's okay to like things that are bad. I feel like so many people often think along the lines of, you like this thing which is bad, therefore you are bad or dumb. And I just don't think this is true. I feel like most people probably have something that they might recognize as a guilty pleasure. But honestly, why feel guilty about it? In my book, it is a-okay to like things that are bad. Liking something that is generally considered to be bad doesn't mean that you're stupid or that you have the wrong opinion. All it means, necessarily, is that your priorities are a bit different than those of others. These are video games, not politics. It doesn't matter. There are no real consequences for liking a bad video game. Your opinions are not better because you only like things that hold up to an objective standard. Besides, let's grant that an objective standard exists when it comes to an artistic medium like video games. It doesn't, but let's just say it does. Who holds that opinion? No one. No one holds the objective standard as their own because they can't. We're people. We're subjective. People are really complicated and have a lot of different reasons that they like or dislike things. I'd much rather more people recognize that about themselves and others than pretend that they're more rational than they are. I feel like a lot of people prefer to hide behind the shield of an objective standard than express their own opinions and feelings, and perhaps have them be examined or scrutinized. This is especially cowardly given that, like I said, that objective standard isn't even all that objective to begin with. People are not bad or stupid for enjoying something that isn't very good. If someone goes back to watch a childhood cartoon and they find themselves enjoying it, whether it's for nostalgia or they just still think the show's funny, it doesn't matter if that show is poorly written or animated. You could use those criticisms to say that the show is bad, and maybe you'd be right to, but that person isn't dumb or bad for still liking it. They simply have their priorities in a different place than you do. I do, though, also think it's important to acknowledge that the things you like are flawed. Criticize your favorites, kill your heroes. Nothing is beyond criticism, especially the thing that you like the most. To quote my close personal friend, Chairman Sheng-Ji Yang, does the sacred brook no improvement? Nothing is perfect. Everything has flaws. Everything will always have flaws. Some are more significant than others, and some matter more to you than others. Daggerfall, like all games, is flawed. Whether its imperfections are too much for a person to bear is dependent entirely on the person in question. But after all, without flaws, a gemstone wouldn't bear such striking color. In conclusion, Daggerfall is bad, but I like it anyway. It's okay to like things which are bad. You should be critical of the things you like, but being critical of something doesn't mean you have to be opposed to it. Daggerfall might be trash, but I'm a rat. I can appreciate good trash now and then. The content is bare bones, the combat overly simplistic, the puzzles are annoying at best. Pre-made spells are a poor introduction to magic for new players, and there's a lot of missed potential in this game. And I still like it. I can't promise that if you try Daggerfall for the first time today that you'll like it. In fact, I would wager that you won't. But I can promise that if you try it, you might like it. There's a lot to like in Daggerfall, and there's a possibility at least that it will click with you. You very well might find that the problems with the game are not all that severe to you. I would love it if this video introduced just one person to a game that they can fall in love with despite all of its many flaws. This is pretty much it. If you somehow made it all the way to the end of this video, thanks. I'm glad you could stand listening to me for however long this video ends up being. I'm sort of obliged to ask that you do the YouTube things. Like the video and share it with someone you think would be interested in it. Don't go spamming it all over the place though, I don't want that and neither does anyone else. You don't need to subscribe. This channel is mostly just Twitch VODs, and I don't currently have any plans on changing that. You can come follow me on Twitch if you're interested, but you probably aren't. If you want to leave a comment, but you can't think of anything to say, then let me give you a prompt. What is your favorite game, and what is its greatest flaw? I'd like to see this topic of conversation brought up with reference to other games. Alright, not so quick second outro time. I wanted to do this. This is a small, unscripted segment. It's not actually that small. It's very unscripted, though. At the end, everything's put into my video editing software. Everything's all edited down as it's going to be. It could be more edited. It could be less edited, but it is where it's at. The only thing left to do will be to, uh, throw this in there and then export. Wanted to talk about this experience. I've never really made a video essay-ish type thing like this before, and I figured I will probably never do it again. I had a good time with the script writing, and I didn't mind the voiceover work, but video editing is not for me. I'm not gonna be doing that. Um, but it was a fun project. I hope that someone appreciates it. I hope that maybe something I said inspired something in somebody. I doubt it, but it's just a thing that I wanted to make. I had an idea for it, and I wanted to reach out and grab it while I had the motivation to do so. I don't really know much else to say. Um, it took me, it didn't actually take me that long, but it was very stressful. I don't know how some people manage to do this sort of thing for a living. Although, to be fair, the people that do it for a living usually also have editors. I'm not necessarily opposed to making something like this again in the future, but it's probably not going to be for a while, unless I just have an idea that I want to grab, like this one. Um, yeah, I can't see it happening in the near future. Maybe if I had the money to pay an editor, I would do this sort of thing more often, but I don't have the money to do to do that, and I would certainly never ask for anyone to do it for free. Um, and if I'm going to pay someone to do this sort of thing, I would want to pay them well. And like I said, I can't do that right now. But I had fun doing it. I enjoyed writing the script. Like I said, I did not enjoy the editing, and it wasn't even that much editing. It's just so stressful to me because I, I'm sort of, in some ways, I'm a perfectionist, and so I basically have to either accept that it doesn't matter and just do whatever, or I stress over it. And so I was trying to strike a balance between obsessing and and just actually getting work done. I wanted it to not be absolutely awful to watch or listen. There are a couple of funny stories about the playthrough that I did. Um, I had to, if you watched it, you probably saw the Lich fight in Sentinel. That was very funny. That section of the footage, in fact, all of Sentinel is sped up 4 times instead of 2 times. Ridiculous. Anyway, that's a story for another time. That's all that this video has the time for.